Hi, everyone. This is Trish Kendall, your host for the Choose and Become interview series. Today, I'm very excited to have my guest with me, Eric McNulty. Eric, just say hi really quick.
Hello, everybody. Great to see
Perfect.
you.
Yes, yeah. I've been really excited to have Eric. So first and foremost, Eric is a Harvard educator, author, and speaker, and he's really a leadership expert for turbulent times. And Eric, we'll get more into what you do and what you focus on. But the way that I always view you and see you as this, leadership expert that works around or with organizations when it comes to high stakes, high stress situations. So we'll get more into that. But I have a little bit of an affinity for Eric because he and I were both speakers recently at TEDx Walden Pond. And I had the opportunity, and I'll get into this later, Eric, that you really moved me with your talk. So let's just put a little pin in that for a second. For those of you that are new to the show or new to this interview series, what I want to do is just take a step back super quick before we move forward, just to set some context around what I'm going to be asking Eric about. So I made 5 critical choices on my journey from the pit of despair. And Eric knows that moment of the pit of despair of my life. And I made 5 critical choices that moved me from that to creating enduring success, lasting true success. And so those 5 choices, this interview series, I set this up so that I could ask people I admire, like Eric, his perspective and lessons and experiences as it relates to these 5 choices in his life. So I'm going to ask Eric about making a first choice. I'm going to ask the second choice is around committing to a two-way agreement. The third critical choice I made was to build trust. The fourth choice was to create community and belonging. And that's where you started pulling my heartstrings a little bit, Eric, with community. And then the fifth critical choice is embracing boundless love, our ability to give love and to receive love. So, okay, enough of me talking. Eric, will you share a little bit more about you, the whole Eric, for my audience and community?
Sure, Trish, and thank you so much for having me. First off, I really get nervous about the word expert. I rather call myself an intensive student of leadership. There's always more to learn, and that's part of what I'm addicted to is learning. So I am a lifelong, life deep learner, and I've really been blessed to be on the journey that I've been on. So I do study crisis leadership and leadership in high stakes situations, which has brought me into contact with lots of really interesting people who make the really difficult choices when sometimes even lives could be on the line, and seeing what they go through and learning from that. But I'm also a birder. I love to go out and watch birds. I'm a traveler. I love food and wine, and love to go on adventures like that. And a lifelong reader and writer. We'll talk a little bit about writing later on because that was part of the choices and things that went on there. And so, as I say, it's when you talk about something like enduring success. Isn't that beyond the moment? When I think about that, I think about success that I'm still
Oh,
proud of once it's all gone, like way in the past. And I see my enduring success as in the people who come after me, the people who I've been able to touch and help maybe in a little bit of a way get better at what they do. And then if they're still, learning from that and passing that on 10 or 20 years from now, that to me is enduring success.
oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And you do that every day because you touch people every day. And beyond the moment, I'm going to grab that. Well, then let's get into then your journey to enduring success. And the first critical choice I made was to pick up the phone when my sister called. Now, for me in that moment, that was a profound first choice. I've since made a whole bunch of first choices that were much more practical, much more practical to that. But what I've learned is that success really begins with making a first choice. Is there a first choice? I'm sure you've made several, but is there one that you'll share with us that's impacted your journey?
Sure, and this is a fairly late in life first choice, actually, but having to make a career transition in 2008, you may recall there was a small dip in the economy that upset a lot of our trajectories, and I had to shift gears. And I remember one of the things I said, because I had a little bit of time off there, was I had been writing my entire life, pretty much as long as I can remember, and it had been part of my life, my work. But it was when I was coming out of that, deciding what to do next, I said, I am going to be a writer. Like I will say that is what I do. And so that was a big step because I had always been afraid to do that. It was like, okay, I know I'm reasonably good at this. I've gotten good grades. I've been able to get paid for, writing press releases and things like that. But when you actually come out and say you were a writer, now you're trying to say, I'm stepping into the big leagues. Am I good enough that if an editor looks at this or someone else or goes out in the marketplace and the big fear was, so what if I suck, right? If you go out and say, this is what I am, and then the world says, well, yeah, who cares?
Oh,
Then what do you do? But I said, you know what? At this point in my life, I was 50 years old at the point, and I said, you know what? Let's just go do it. I think I trust myself. I think I'm good enough, or I'll get better enough to do this, and it's now or never. So that was the first choice, and that's made a lot because it's gone into much more uh, a much broader writing career into writing books and articles, and it also that led into teaching and speaking and all the other things. So it's been that choice led to a lot of other really interesting places.
but that's really, and Eric, I didn't know that about, like, I know you're a writer, right? I know you've got several books. I know you teach, but I didn't realize that you made a choice to say, I'm a writer. That's a right. That is a big deal. And so tell me just a little bit. Just tell us a little bit about some of the books that you've written. And then when you say that got you into teaching, what was the transition there?
So
I'm just curious.
yeah, no, and it really is interesting declaring yourself. I think that's one of the things. And I had in my younger years, I moved a lot when I was young. I changed jobs. I've had a very diverse and somewhat serendipitous career. So to say you're any one thing was almost was very
Mm,
challenging for me because I had been a bit of a chameleon, and I could shift as needed and was of a utility infielder. So to declare something was really a big deal. But it was in that moment when I was uh, leaving one job that was ending and having to find something else. And I sat down with a couple of people who I knew professionally, and they said, "Could you help us write a book?" And I'd never written a book, and I said, "Unemployment, write a book? Sure, I can help you write a book." Now I'd written articles, I've written press releases, and
mhm.
and I actually had written I had a draft of a novel, which was really awful. But I said, I can do this. And so that piece was okay, help us write a book. So I came and dove into that. And that was the first book, which is a book called Renegotiating Healthcare, which is about negotiation and conflict resolution in healthcare and related settings. I teach that now at Harvard and elsewhere. That particular topic, which is that was more of a textbook, but it was good because in there is a novel. It's both a textbook, but then there's a story that winds through the entire book that we had to write that
Mm,
shows the concepts in action, which then led to other writing. And so there's a couple of ebooks I've written. One's called Your Critical First 10 Days as a Leader, and another one called Three Critical Shifts to Make as a Leader. But those are shortish, 5, 6,000 word ebooks. And that led
yeah.
to the one over my shoulder, which is called You're It, Crisis Change and How to Lead When It Matters Most, that came out in 2019. And that really does capture the program I work at Harvard called the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative. My colleagues and I, our now 20 years of work in the field, deploying to disasters, being with
Hmm.
leaders in the midst of crises, trying to capture those stories as well as the principles and the techniques they use to navigate through them. And and that was such a great adventure because again I had been in publishing. I knew that world a bit, which helped us navigate it, but then having to put it together and again assemble the stories and make sure you've got the right collection, what's right for this, what's right for that, um, how does it flow and be really useful for a reader. That was good. I've got another book in the works now, which is looking forward and looking at how we lead through these really complex challenges like climate
Yeah.
change and biodiversity loss and social stress, enormously high social stress. How do we lead, which I think is very different than we've led traditionally in organizations. Um, but that is part of the writing in doing my work for Harvard and deploying to disasters. I started writing case studies to capture those lessons in shorter form. And I had worked at Harvard Business School, so I had never taught a case study, but I had seen the best in the world teach case studies. And so I asked my colleagues who were at the School of Public Health, I said, have you ever taught with cases? And they said, no, we've done like little snippets, but so I said, can I give it a shot? And so I get up in front of a class and I taught a case the way I had seen the people at Harvard Business School teach it. And I had fun. I really liked it. And so I was, fair, I would say at best to start, but I knew a couple tricks so I could get through it. And but that then led to I actually wound up in an academic role for the last 10 or so years at Harvard and also teaching other programs, other schools. But really enjoyed that. Just helping people learn, helping ignite that little fire of curiosity and seeing the light in their eyes. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool. I get that. Or I've got a question. That really it's such an engaging way to be able to make a living.
Ah, that's just awesome. And I appreciate that the first choice you shared was later in life. I totally appreciate your perspective. And then I'll move us on, but your perspective on why it's hard to make first choices. Because in your instance, I think what you shared here with me was, oh my gosh, but is this the identity? And what if I'm not good? And what if people don't view me as a writer? And but that's what I say I am. What if they don't see me as that? And there's all these things that come in and around us, I think, that become barriers to making first choices. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to take us to the second critical choice. I was going to ask you another follow-up question, but if we
Yeah,
have
sure.
time, I
No.
might move backwards before we move forwards. So the second critical choice I made was to commit to a two-way agreement. For me, this agreement, it was a near contractual agreement, was between me and my sister at the
Mhm.
time that she took me into her home. But since then, I've really reflected, and I actually work with teams on two-way agreements because we enter into two-way agreements all the time,
Right.
informally and formally. What I experienced is the power of committing. That when both parties come together with the mutual expectation and desire for a positive outcome, we're in this for a positive outcome, that when we both commit to actions that may start as I have to, can transform to I want to. At least that was my experience, and that it transformed to I want to. I think the idea of two-way agreements are tending to be more front and center now,
Hmm.
even when I think about employers and the workforce and everything that's happening. But will you share your perspective on two-way agreements and an agreement that you've committed to, if you would share what that was, and I don't know, what did you give and what did you get?
So this may be a little bit different than what you're thinking, but it's one I find interesting. It goes back to that novel that I mentioned earlier. And the two-way agreement I made with myself was I'm going to write something that I know is going to suck. It is not going to be good, right? But in order to see that I can do it, I've got to do it. So I've got to say, can I write, give or take, 250 pages of coherent prose with characters on an arc, with a plot, with things that happen? Can I actually do that? But I had to do it in a way that I said, I know, because again, having written for a long time and knowing that you just don't sit down one day and say, oh, I'm inspired. Let me pop out the great American novel. Um, that I would have to,
Right.
I was committing to getting better and being willing to put the work in to be bad until I could be better. And so I've yet to tackle the second novel which is okay. It's because I wound up making this transition professionally, where I'm now writing nonfiction. That's what I've been doing a lot of, in addition to speaking and teaching, for the last 15 years. And so I've got the idea for the next novel or a set of novels that will come, but that's okay, because again, to write a book length anything is intimidating. And so I think that was the two-way
Oh,
agreement was I'm going to, I agree to do it bad until I get good. And so that was, I think, really helpful and Still have that novel tucked away, and I've read it, and it's really bad. But that's again, you
Oh,
you don't get up to the top of a ski slope and say, "Oh, okay, here I go, first run. I'm going to be ready for the Olympics." You're going to fall down a whole bunch. So that was the agreement that came to mind when I first heard you talk about this.
and in that agreement, if I play this back, uh, agreeing to committing to be bad until you're good would mean that your commitment is still going, that there's a second book in there that you're going to write
Yeah,
because you didn't say you got to good on the first one.
right.
So the commitment is still
The
going.
commitment is still there. You'll have me back when I publish it, and we'll have another
And
conversation.
did you? Yes. Yes, 100%, 100%. And then I just want to ask a couple of details. If this is front and center to your mind, if it's not, that is okay.
Okay.
When you made the commitment of, I'm going to write a book that sucks, was there actual accountability points that you put in place for yourself that said, I am doing this and this and this in order to write this book? Like smaller accountability points within that two-way agreement.
So there were, in that I gave myself a rough deadline by which I wanted to do it, and then I had to
Okay.
commit to writing a certain amount, a certain number of words, a certain amount of research, a certain all the steps that go into putting together a book. You've got to have some discipline around that, and it definitely requires discipline.
Mhm.
Um, and so going through and then actually sharing it with some people to say, okay, this is what I've got. What do you think? Which is the first scary thing to do that. And I actually ultimately wound up sharing it with the gentleman who's now my agent for my nonfiction work. I was actually showing it to a literary agent. That's a really scary thing. And he confirmed that it sucks. But he's okay with the rest of the other work that I do.
And then
So
you were like, great, you know what? That was my goal.
yeah, exactly. I
Yeah,
win.
great, nailed it.
I
That was
win.
my objective.
Um, and now I have
Right.
such amazing appreciation, and I know actually my upstairs neighbor is a novelist, and see how much work goes into that, because actually I think it's much harder than writing nonfiction, because you've got to create that story. It isn't that you go find the story and tell the
Sure.
story; you actually have to create it and create a lot of backstory, and it's just an enormous amount of work and a lot of rewriting. And that's the thing that really is horrible about writing, at least for me, is the writing. The first draft is actually relatively easy for me because I'm good with words, but having to go back and
Hmm.
find the problems, rehash, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. But you have to. It's the only way it comes out to be worth anybody else reading.
Wow, I'm sure it's just such a craft and such a lift. My just like a little veer, Joe, my husband, wanted to be a writer. So now he's not 50 yet. He's almost 50. So maybe he will,
There's still time.
plant his flag at some point and say, I am a writer. And he wanted to be a writer. And I always feel like, oh my gosh, did family and, all the things that get in the way of following the dream or your aspiration or what you really identify with. I mean, I listen to you and I can't help but think of Joe, and that one of the things that I know just really holds true to him. And he's kind of lost his way there for a little bit. So
There's still time.
we might have a part 3 where Joe is doing something. The third critical choice that I made on my journey was to build trust. At this point on my journey, I had to build trust in myself first. I had to choose to build trust in myself. And I did that by doing the little things great. And then that made me feel very confident that I could begin to inspire the trust of others. For you, I like to break this down maybe
Sure.
into two components, which is we'll start with the first. When there's been times in your life that you had to build trust in yourself, how do you do it? Or how did you do it? And you can give me a specific
Mm-hmm.
example at this point in my writing a book that sucks,
Right.
or at whatever point you can give me the actual example. But I also am very interested in how you built the trust in yourself.
So, and I'm going to deviate from writing here a bit and move into other areas of activity, which I think is important. Because this idea of trusting yourself is so critical, and I have found that sort of preparation is one thing, so that you sort of know you've pre-tested things a bit. But the time that came to mind when I was thinking about your question of building trust was actually my first real speaking opportunity on stage as an adult. Again, I have spoke at my high school graduation, and again, I was not very good, but I got a few laughs. That was good. But I was working at another part of Harvard. I was producing conferences, and our the after lunch guest speaker was someone I had found, a woman named Allison Brown, and your listeners should all go up listen to Allison Brown. She's the Grammy award winning banjo player, and she runs Compass Records down in Nashville. And I found her, it was for a business conference, because she started out in life wanting to be an investment banker. And she got her MBA, and she was working at, I think it was Citibank, but kept finding herself flipping through banjo magazines under her desk. And finally, she made the choice to go be a professional banjo
Oh,
player. And she's amazing. She's an amazing human being too. So I had tracked Allison down, and I said, can you come tell your
oh,
story at this conference?" And I had done the background, and my boss, who was the head of our group, was going to be interviewing her on stage. Because people are having lunch. I'm back making sure the stage looks good, everything's ready. Allison's there, and I hand my notes to my boss, and I said, "Here are your notes for the interview." And she turned to me and said, "You know this better than I do. You're going to do it." And there I am as people start filtering back in, and all of a sudden we have 150 people sitting in this big ballroom. Thank goodness they were big fans of Allison Brown, because it made my lift a little bit lighter. Um, but then I had to have the confidence that I actually knew this stuff, and that I could actually conduct an interview on stage, worthy of the people who had paid money to be there. I mean, this was not a volunteer event, so I had to actually reach expectations. And so, um, my boss said a couple of things where she handed the cards back to me, and she said, "First of all, you're from Harvard. If you say something, if you forget something, no one's going to know it but you. And if they don't understand what you're saying, they'll think they're stupid because you're from Harvard, right? So use that," and which actually took an enormous amount of pressure off. So
right,
if I
right.
babble incoherently, they'll think it's because they're stupid. And so, and Allison was great to work with. She's a tremendous person. And so, but that was a matter of having the right relationships
Mm.
around there. And when someone pushed you in the end of the pool, think to swim. Trust yourself to swim. Don't trust yourself to drown. And so, because I really had been afraid. I was like, when
Oh,
I previously had to do some, the MC stuff at a conference, the bathrooms down the hall, lunches at 1 o'clock, those kind of things. My knees would knock, and I was terrified.
yeah.
Um, until all of a sudden I wasn't. And now this is a big chunk of what I do is I go around the world and talk to people and stand up on stage and do it.
Yeah.
And
You're an incredible
well,
speaker.
you too, and you've been on stage. We've both been on stage, and you step out there. You're like, is the voice going to work? Is it? Am I going to remember things or going to forget things? And you've got to trust it's going to happen. And so that was it was that being pushed. Thank goodness somebody pushed me in the pool. I didn't jump in. Somebody pushed me in the pool, and I trusted myself to swim, and it worked out well.
And it's so awesome that your boss, she trusted you before you trusted yourself in that moment. In that
Yes.
moment, her confidence and trust was so high, and then you stepped into it. And now, what you said at the beginning of your story, I think plays into this for me for sure is being prepared,
Hmm.
preparedness. I mean, we prepare. I know you prepared the crap out of your TEDx talk.
Right. So did
People,
you.
I don't think necessarily know that because it comes off so natural. It comes off, but preparedness, I think, breeds confidence, and confidence can help breed trust. So here's something else that's on my mind, and we didn't prep on this. So if we want to bypass it, we can bypass it. But one of the things I'm thinking about as it relates to you with trust is when I think about your TEDx talk, and this will get to community and belonging as well, our fourth
Mhm.
choice. But I won't get your words totally right. So I just want to say what my feeling was. What my feeling was. My feeling was um, what you were relaying was when groups of people come together, especially in critical high stress situations,
Hmm.
how we interact together, and I might say trust each other, it's can dictate what happens in that situation. I mean, am I thinking about that right? And I think about trust being a part of that. So how does trust play into this?
Well, absolutely. And I think, the core of what I was talking about is that we as humans are a social species. We are hardwired to work together. Yet, for so much of our lives, we have to push our individual career. We compete to get into a college. We compete for jobs. We're always competing for parking places. We're always competing. Yet, the essence of who we are as humans is our ability to be together. And that does require enormous amounts of trust, right? You've got to be vulnerable and hope that you and others are predictable in the face of vulnerability. That if I give my trust to you, you'll have my back, and vice versa. And so, I think when you think of
Yeah.
when things have worked really well, whether you're in a community group or you're in at work or wherever it happens to be, when you really feel like you're part of a community in that setting, how much better it is, how much more uplifting it is, how the positive energy flows, how the emotions are good. And again, when I work with people in crisis situations, I see that the times there's really high performance is there's also really high trust. People know they are there for each other, and resilience is first a group phenomenon and then an individual phenomenon. It's all about social ties and knowing people you can count on, people you can turn to when things are not good. Think people who will be there to, even if it's just get you that cup of coffee or whatever it is, that you're not there alone. Alone is a very bad place for us as humans. That's why solitary confinement in prison is sort of the ultimate punishment. We are not meant to be alone. And so that's why, and trust happens. Yes, you trust yourself, but you trust yourself when you trust others or others trust you. I mean, really, you can't really separate those things totally.
It hits hard with me for all the reasons, and I was just meeting with a client in Chicago, and this gentleman, he made this wasn't about community, but it was about him, and he said, you know what, a first choice that I made, this is him speaking, is that I choose to trust. I choose to enter an interaction in a situation and meeting someone, choosing to trust them.
Hmm.
And then, if my trust is lost, that's different, but I go into it choosing to trust. And I know that there's sometimes different views on that. You need to earn my
Mm-hmm.
trust before I'll give it, or I'm going to give it until you lose it. What I appreciate about what you're talking about is community coming together
Mm-hmm.
and trusting each other. Maybe sometimes we need to earn it. Maybe sometimes we just give it right away because that's in the
Mm-hmm.
greater good of us together. Um, but trust being just a critical element of us as humans. Well, we are naturally getting into my fourth critical choice. And the fourth critical choice was to intentionally create my own
Mm-hmm.
create community and create belonging. For me, because I grew up, and this,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up without a sense of belonging. And I'm
Right.
not alone in that. Lots and lots and lots of people have experienced that through, I think all of us have experienced not belonging in some way or another. I held on to it so strongly that I don't belong. I actually wore like a badge of honor that I didn't need community. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't need anyone. I didn't need to belong. And you and I know that was a bunch of hogwash
Right.
because like you were saying, human beings, we are made to belong within a tribe.
Right.
So I went on my journey. I figured out that belonging requires action,
Mm-hmm.
and it requires, in my opinion, reciprocity,
Yes.
reciprocal action from me and action from you. So I want to get more of your perspective, both on community and belonging, but I'm going to flip it and I'll start with belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it feel like to not belong?
It's such an interesting question, and I think as you say, most of us have had those times in our life. I mentioned that I moved a lot when I was growing up, and Most of those moves were okay. I figured it out, but there was one time in particular with junior high school, which is the seventh circle of hell for most of us, I think. Um, when I was in a town where I just did not fit in, I didn't belong. I made some basic social mistakes that got me ostracized, and I really felt alone. And if not for very supportive parents, who I don't think they realized how alone I felt, but I knew that they were there for me. Although they were divorced, they were both there for me. My dog, God love my dog, who was there, and I played James Taylor and Carole King albums till they wore out, and that was very comforting music. Um, and I know what it felt to be very much alone. But I think what I carried forward from that, well, first of all, was the next time we moved, and thank goodness we did move when we did. I was not going to let that happen again. But the trick then is not just to fit in, but it's being able to show up as you and belong, right? You shape shift so that you're sort of camouflaged and you feel like you fit in, but you're not really showing up. That's just a different kind of being alone. But how do you actually be able to show up as yourself,
Yeah.
and be strong enough to be individual and uh, and feel accepted and loved and cared for, and that you are part of a community, part of that community where you're giving as well. And so that was, I think looking back on timing, it was very fortunate for my trajectory that we happened to, by chance, move again when we did. So I moved to a better place. But I've always now, as much as I have a strong introverted side as well as I have to be an extrovert out speaking, try and be very cognizant of who's not fitting in the room and how do I help them fit in? How do I reach out, be the person who reaches out and say, hey, come on over here, let's grab a cup of coffee, or bring them into a conversation that is so that's I'm always aware of that.
And you're intentional.
I'm intentional about that, not sometimes awkward, but always intentional.
Yeah, yeah, because then I also think so sometimes we get blocked by fear of rejection. I
Right.
think I'm like, oh, does this person want me to? Are they going to think that like there's all this crap around us that blockades or becomes a barrier of just making that choice to go and invite that person. One thing I got to say this because you use the terminology shape shifter, and I'm going to put that in my pocket because I did that my whole until I was in my 30s.
Hmm.
I belonged by being a chameleon. Like, what 30? Oh, I need to smoke pot and listen to punk rock. Then because I want to be a part of this group, but that even went into my professional life too, not smoking pot and listening to punk rock
That's a
music,
heck of a group.
but and yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, I want to work where you work. But I appreciate that because I think oftentimes still in being incredibly healthy mentally, spiritually, all the things, I can still come into a situation thinking about shape shifting and and have to be cognizant of that and in an appropriate way bring Trish, just
Hmm.
bring Trish. And so I think about that often. Tell me a little bit about some of the communities that you're a part of.
So I'm very much part of my geographic community, and one of the things I like best about the place where I live is that there are a lot of friends in the neighborhood, and it's a dense urban area, which people think of as, oh, nobody wants to talk to each other. Well, we all want to talk to each other, and I again give credit to the dogs because dog walking is a great way to meet people. But just neighbor helping neighbor, shoveling during the winter, and those kind of things. So that is one community. I'm part of the community of birders, and so when I go out, if I'm out walking and I've got a pair of binoculars and someone else does, we start talking to almost official, just instantly about what we're seeing and what we're thinking, and there's a bond there. But I think one of the more powerful communities, and this goes to again what's over my shoulder there, the work I do at the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, which we were just talking the other day. We're having a discussion about are we just another executive education program or not, or what makes us different. And one of the things that came out, which I saw right away, was we're a family, and that we never let go of the people who come through our program. And these are people who are making, they're out saving lives, they're out making tough decisions, and yet more than 1,000 people who've been through the program, Uh, and we are in touch. We are always in touch. And just, again, and helping each other is a part of community, right? Is of helping each other. Just in the last couple of weeks, someone reached out and said, "Hey, I've got a
Yeah.
way to deliver potable water. Do you know somebody who can help me get this thing into Gaza?" It's like, yeah, I think I do. And I reach over and make this connection to that person. Say, you two need to talk to each other. Retired police officer who's now working on, because of a death of a relative, working on reducing the rate of cervical cancer in the military, which there's a higher than normal incidence of this for a bunch of reasons. He said, so can you help? Do you have any ideas? Yeah, I know this person and that person and that person. Let's make that connection. Let's make it go. And so that's the stuff I really love about my work. And I also know that I am, any city in this country I show up in, I am one or we're most two phone calls away from people who are going to say, "Hey, let's grab a burger and a beer. Let's go. I want to, sit down with you." And so it is this
Awesome.
this family, and it is, again, the people. It's people who are helping people. It's the helpers, as Fred Rogers talked about. It's the helpers out there who are there for each other, there for us all. And I'm really fortunate to have become part of that community, quite to the accidental story we told earlier about becoming a writer and then teacher.
Yes, exactly. And this beautifully leads me to the fifth critical choice. The fifth critical choice that I made was to embrace, like literally take it, embrace it, my boundless capacity to give love, the verb, the action, the verb of love, and accept the love that others want to give me. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, it from my perspective, plays into that. Because a lot of people will start talking about love the emotion, and
Mm.
I don't mean love the emotion that's not a choice. I'm talking about love the verb that is a choice, and that manifests in different ways for different people in different cultures and different situations. So, and I think we've peppered that in here in this conversation. Will you give me your perspective on how giving love the verb manifests in your world?
So I think it's such an interesting question, and the way you've pulled it apart is really interesting as well. Because, right, we say love, we immediately go to the emotion, which is different than expressing it. And again, this is not necessarily romantic love or familial love, but how do you actually just show your love for other people? And I think it really,
Yes, humans.
yeah, humans. And it is to me, it's sort of being there when it's inconvenient, being there when it takes a little extra effort. So again, the two examples I just talked about of people reaching out and saying, "Hey, I know you're busy, but can you help?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm really busy, but I'm not too busy for that, because you're trying to express love. I'm going to help you in that as well." And so, that's it. And I know, because I've had a lot of help in my along my journey, and people who have gone out of their way and said, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll tell you about this. I'll help you out there." That people, I get calls about, "Hey, can I do an informational interview about what it's like to be in academia or to be in crisis leadership or whatever?" And I'm always, unless I'm going to be on an airplane someplace, say yes, because that was
Yeah, I
given
mean,
that
you
was
said yes to me,
yeah,
by
right,
the way.
right. And this is,
Yeah.
yeah, this
You
is
were when I asked you to spend this time with me.
right. And we just if we keep paying it forward and paying it sideways to each other, we are rich beyond belief. And to me, that is what, love is has no limit. So being able to pay it forward that way, and it is, to me, it's a privilege and it's an honor, and it's what, at the end of the day, what makes life worth it.
Eric, thank you. Thank you for choosing, like we just said, choosing to give me your love. I'll say that. Give me your love by accepting this invitation, coming in and spending this time with me. And really, for everyone who knows you, who's watching this, they've watched your TEDx talk. For those who haven't, I am telling you, just go and Google or go to YouTube, whatever, make it easy. Google Eric McNulty, MC capital NULTY. You'll see it on here. And his TEDx talk, if I get it right, overcoming the faults in our default
That's
thinking.
right.
But your talk, and I was right there in the front of the audience, hit me so hard with your focus on community, trust, You didn't use the word love. That's the word that came into my mind. And the idea of moving from a me to a we,
Mm-hmm.
a me to a we type of thinking. And I learn from you every time I interact with you. And I thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I want to say one last thing about that TEDx evening, if I may, because it so relates to what we just talked about, which was that was an environment. There were 15 of us, I
Yes,
think, who were
please.
speaking that evening, and that could have been a hyper competitive environment. We all had an hour TED talk to deliver, but that was such an instant community, and there was so much love in that room, and people like you rooting for
Totally.
me and me rooting for you, and it became very much not about us. We had our moment, we had our 10 minutes on the stage to do our thing, but the 8 hours that we were there,
Yeah.
believe it or not, folks, was all about being there for each other and being there for each
It
other and
was.
loving each other and
It
supporting.
absolutely. Yes. Yes. There was no me. It went from me to
Absolutely.
we. And each of us made that happen. Each of us intentionally made that happen. And I am with you, Eric. It was an incredible experience. And now I have another community. I now have another community. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Choose and Become interview series. Thank you for being along this journey. Choose and become. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Choose and Become interview series. To check out more episodes, go to www.trishkendall.com/podcast, or go to any of your favorite podcast channels, including YouTube, under Trish Kendall Speaks, and you'll find this interview and more. Choose and become.